Do you have any traffic, they say how far, but by 12 o'clock?
When I looked at it through my binoculars, you could see a perfectly clear, defined, so-called cigar-type shape.
No idea what it was. Say away from 17,000.
These were official Department of Defense unexplained objects.
What we were seeing out there were essentially radar contacts that we didn't think belonged there. Commercial pilots, military pilots have been sharing a lot of their experiences and what they're seeing on a regular basis.
Pilots are scared that if they come forward individually, they're out the door. But if we all go together, the door's not big enough to get us all through it at the same time.
People would say, you should be wearing a tinfoil hat. I would say 50% of the pilots that were working for the same airline that I did have seen something.
Their sightings go all the way back to the 40s and 50s and 60s.
You say something about a UFO to me, I'd have laughed at you.
Picture the brightest, shiniest silver that you've ever seen.
As I first saw it, it came into view, glinting off the horizon.
I want to make it clear that these pilots, I think, are being entirely honest. But one thing people have to realize now is the sky is full of stuff.
Up to this point, it's been difficult for airline pilots or military pilots to say anything.
Some airlines do not want to be known as the airline you fly in order to see UFO.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is.
Rotating right around it.
U.S. Navy documented several hundred observations of phenomena that are unexplainable in restricted military airspace. These are very credible witnesses who have seen these objects on a range of government platforms. My name is Tim Gallaudet. I'm a retired Rear Admiral from the U.S. Navy. In 2015, I was in charge of all the meteorologists in the Navy and oceanographers, providing weather forecasts for safety of flight. I was a one-star admiral working for the United States Fleet Forces Command. I had a top-secret clearance, and I've been running special access programs. For example, if there was a very special weather sensor that we own that we didn't want our adversaries to have, that's something I would have a need to know as the head meteorologist of the Navy. There were pilots flying off the USS Theodore Roosevelt that were having experiences witnessing UAP, and I received an email on the Navy's secret network from the operations officer, and the subject of it was urgent safety of flight issue. And he had attached a video. The video shows an object moving rapidly. It seemed to be just basically a white sphere. It really didn't have any means of propulsion. There was no exhaust. The text of the email was short, and it just said, if any of you know what this is, tell me ASAP. And it was addressed to me and the 20 or so other subordinate commanders under U.S. Fleet Forces Command. So these are 1- and 2-star admirals. Some of them are in charge of carrier strike groups. The disconcerting thing was the next day, that email was wiped from my computer, and no one talked about that incident. It was never discussed. We were forced to do nothing about a serious risk.
I was aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2015. I used to fly the F-18 Super Hornet in the Navy for about 11 years and was very uncertain what we were dealing with here. The pilots that saw the object described as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, about 4 to 6 feet in diameter. And I assumed that with enough chatter, video we saw, that it would go up the proper channels and there would be some type of response, but it didn't. And this wasn't the first time that we had seen these things. A few years earlier, one of these actually almost hit one of our aircraft. 2 aircraft, about 150 feet apart. One of these objects went right between the 2 aircraft. That was what we would consider near midair. I saw the pilots when they came back from the flight. They were in the ready room with all their gear on. And the pilot looked at me and he said, I almost hit one of those damn things. He just had a look of shock on his face. His mouth was open. We all knew what he was referring to when he said those things. We didn't really have a name for them, but we all understood that there were these unknown objects in our airspace.
There was a spike and a surge around 2015 of encounters involving U.S. Navy ships. We're having sightings of UFOs on a regular basis. We're getting hundreds of reports per year now. Clearly, that's not something that just changed overnight.
These are pilots of some of the most advanced fighter planes in the world saying, I experienced an encounter with something that I can't explain. One of the challenges with almost any sighting is that there are a lot of possible mundane answers as well. These could be craft from China or Russia or Iran, or it could even be US technology that the pilots encountering it don't understand is our own.
One thing people have to realize now is the sky is full of stuff. Everything from kids' balloons, that rise up high enough to, be moving at high speeds, to all kinds of drone technologies and such. So, there's a whole list of things. And so, for any individual case, you have to actually look at the data, examine it, unpack the time of day, unpack the weather that was happening. And you typically find that the vast majority of them are explainable.
My job was safety of flight. I knew these objects are not of our own origin because we, the U.S. government, doesn't conduct experiments in training ranges. And I had a top secret clearance. I knew all the threat capabilities what China and Russia owned, and I knew they didn't have any technology like that.
At the very beginning of this, we actually assumed it was a radar error. But once we started correlating these sightings with our missile systems, with our camera systems, and eventually with our eyeballs, we actually had to assume that these were physical objects that could hurt our aircraft.
Did you talk to moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay.
When I saw that email and then it was removed from my computer, I didn't speak out because I wanted to keep serving. And I realized, okay, this is classified. I'm not supposed to have seen it. I'll just salute smartly and move on. Because if I tried to speak out, I would have been forced to leave the military. But I had to change my thinking a bit once I got out of the government because I knew these were causing risk to the safety of flight. We needed to address that. That's why I decided to speak up.
I will say that when I made the decision to talk about UAP and pilot reports, I also knew I was essentially slitting my own throat in some way.
Does it sound possible to you that that kind of secrecy is still happening?
Well, that just seems to be the case.
Ryan Graves kind of jolted the world, certainly in Washington.
I've been reporting on unidentified objects since 2014 and 2015 off of the coast of Virginia Beach.
How common was this, and what were they saying?
We upgraded our radar systems, and when we flew with the new radars, we started seeing objects on our radar. I don't think I would have made those statements if I thought I was going to be in the Navy for the rest of my career at that point. The stigma and the fear of repercussions would have been much too strong, frankly. But in the same token, that's a massive problem because this is a recognized safety issue.
Unfortunately, the stigma around the UAP issue is so great that nobody would touch it. You couldn't discuss this topic at all in the military. And we're now learning that it's a relatively frequent occurrence for commercial airline pilots as well. These pilots have greatly feared the damage to their reputations and careers from discussing UFOs.
Some airlines do not want to be known as the airline you fly in order to see a UAP off the wing. My name is Richard Haynes, and I established NARCAP, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. I was a senior research scientist at NASA for about 21 years. I was involved in the Gemini program, which is a two-man capsule in the Earth orbit. That went on to the Apollo program and then eventually to Space Station. I was initially quite skeptical of this subject of UAP. It didn't fit my paradigm or my colleagues, didn't fit traditional science. But I eventually met pilots, commercial pilots that came to NASA Ames in California to carry out research in our flight simulators there. And I would just once in a while ask them a question, have you ever seen anything you couldn't identify in your flying career? Once in a while, they would look at me with a strange expression and say, well, if you promise not to tell anybody, I'll tell you my story. That's what got me hooked. And I can tell you one story that a pilot told me. He was flying left seat, that's senior captain, with a younger man in the right seat, and the captain got to talking about strange anomalous phenomena. After they landed, he got a call, we're going to schedule you to see the psychiatrist for our office. And I came to understand that pilots have a wide range of motives for not telling the story. And one of the reasons not to tell the story is it collides with our belief system. And so that's hard to admit. But another reason, and I think one of the most prominent reasons, is they didn't want to lose their job.
My name is Brent Sipley. I'm a commercial airline pilot. I've been flying for about 36 years now. My sighting occurred in 2019. We were operating from Dallas to Louisville. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. When we first picked up the object, we thought it was another aircraft. As we got closer to the object, we could see that it had no air surfaces, no engines, no anything. It was just a sphere. And it was extremely reflective, very bright, brighter than any lights I'd ever seen on an aircraft. And then it started to turn green, almost like it was so reflective that it was picking up the ground. My first officer, Jake, grabbed his phone, got the video of the UAP, and he got a good beat on it. Right here, you can see the sphere as we're going under it. It's very, very bright, and it's going right over top of the aircraft right now. And I contacted Indy Center, and I was like, we've got high altitude traffic, 12 o'clock. And he goes, I don't have anything here. Let me switch over to primary. The primary is just a raw sweep of the radar. And then you hear him just go, huh. And then there was a really long pause and just dumped us. Basically, air traffic control at that point was telling us, we don't want to hear about whatever you're seeing right now. I'm not going to say I've seen everything, but in 36 years of flying, I've seen a lot of things. From Venus and Jupiter rising, I've seen weather balloons. They looked nothing like this that I saw that day. I didn't really want to come forward with any of this because it could be something that could potentially end a career. The stigma associated with it is, it's much more than just, people, whistling the X-Files when you walk by. Pilots have to go through medicals every 6 months. We have to do training every 6 months. There's lots of ways that people can get you out of your flying seat. And why give them ammunition?
I'm dubious that all of the characteristics of some of these craft are being captured accurately by the witnesses, or that aliens are visiting Earth. But, it's clear that some of these encounters are still unsolved. The government has said UFOs are not aliens, but it has never answered what UFOs are, and it has never seemed particularly interested in figuring out what they are if they're not aliens.
When we look back at U.S. government investigations of UAP, Project Blue Book went on until 1970, but it was not really a scientific investigation. It was really more of a propaganda public relations effort.
People lost faith in Project Blue Book over the years, so the Air Force commissioned this study, basically saying that there was nothing to it and it wasn't worthy of investigation. And Blue Book was shut down as a result of that study, which was, of course, fine with the Air Force.
After Blue Book was basically put to bed in 1969, pilots had almost nowhere to go to report their sightings until the formation of a number of private organizations. Because when an airplane and a UFO or a UAP come in close proximity, there is always a safety issue. Why? Because the pilot never knows what that object or phenomenon is going to do.
I think that Project Blue Book didn't treat witnesses very well. There was an effort to ridicule witnesses, to explain cases away when they really didn't have adequate explanations. And there was a sense in the general public that there was a cover-up going on, that they were not telling us the truth.
Professional pilots, both commercial and military, do see UFOs, but the culture of silence within their ranks means the public almost never hears about it.
After the government shut down its work on UFOs and declared that there was nothing to it, the work fell into the hands of civilian groups.
Well, there have been quite a number of them over the ages. The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Then MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, came on the scene. And then there is NARCAP, NARCAP, which I helped to establish, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. A colleague and I, his name is Ted Rowe, got together one day in 1999. And we talked about what can we do to make a reporting center for professional pilots a safe place to report their sightings. We pulled together a board of directors. We had air traffic controller, meteorologist, pilots, physicists, chemists, because that's how science operates.
NARCAP was probably the best group there was at the time. It was the closest thing we had to a government agency because of the caliber of people involved.
Our objective in NARCAP was to collect a body of evidence that would be sufficient to take to the International Civil Aviation Organization to work out safety procedures. And so I started collecting cases, and I ended up with thousands of pilot sightings that would demonstrate a relationship between UAP and flight safety.
If you said something about a UFO to me, I'd have laughed at you.
Has it changed your outlook?
Yeah, because I've been out there and saw him flying all over the town.
Back in those days, NARCAP had a website, and they actually had a phone number there. And Richard Haynes was very responsive to these calls, and he would talk to these pilots year after year and record the conversations.
In other words, you couldn't see it through your front window, but only the door window.
Right, depends on how I moved. It was just moving in and out the whole time. Like, it made an abrupt change in attitude and then zipped across the sky, and then when it climbed in, it made another abrupt change.
Dr. Haynes has many, many tapes, audio tapes of conversations he had with pilots, and they're just amazing to listen to.
Came through a pass north of Seoul and turned around to make our approach into the airport, and we saw this deal hovering, right in front of us, and then it just took off. So the pilot just asked us to keep quiet about it because it's clear. And
Picture the brightest, shiniest silver that you've ever seen, and multiply that 100 times and try to get how shiny this object is.
And from audio tapes of those conversations, Richard Haynes wrote this report, and it was about 100 pages, and in that report, he documented all kinds of incidences between pilots and UFOs, all of them affecting aviation safety, but in a lot of different ways.
And I sent those copies out to, I'd say, at least a dozen recipients, the American government and all the major airlines. And I waited. I hoped that it would elicit some kind of response, but I didn't get one response.
There were a lot of cases way before the ones that we're seeing now that also should have been paid attention to. But in those days, it was so deeply ignored. It was totally taboo in the United States, as opposed to other countries where it was completely different. France sees it as a scientific problem. It had an official agency that went back to the 1970s. The Chilean government set up an official agency under the purview of the Air Force in Chile. And it was known to the world at large, especially to all the pilots, that there was a place they could go to report UFO sightings.
De que la gente está tomando conciencia de que existe un cierto fenómeno que debe ser analizado desde un punto de vista multidisciplinario.
without an entity, an agency, or an organization for the pilots to go to report UFO sightings or UFO events, we're losing lots of valuable data. We shouldn't be making it hard for pilots to report. The UK actually requires its pilots to fill out reports of any sightings.
My name is Captain Ray Bowyer. I started flying training in 1984 and finished flying in about 2015. About 31 years.
And I'm 544, then pass message.
Do you have any traffic, can you say how far by 12 o'clock level?
It was 2007 in the springtime. We were flying a scheduled airline service from Southampton in England on the south coast into Alderney, Channel Islands. I think there were about 9 or 10 people on board. And just as we got into the cruise sector of the flight, I noticed something ahead, a very bright yellow dot in front of us. Brilliant, brilliant yellow with this band of interfacing light between the going up and down this dark band. And the yellow interfaced the dark band, and there was these lights going up and down at different speeds. Quite impressive to see.
Very flat platform. I'm looking at it through binoculars as we speak. I was about 60 miles north of Alderney when I first saw the aircraft. The second object appeared around about 20 miles away from a landing point, and getting closer to them, they started getting larger and larger.
It was a shape about 20-to-1 aspect ratio, and it came to the point where I didn't need binoculars to see it anymore, and we're still 30 miles away. Air traffic controller asked if there were any other aircraft that could witness this, and there was another aircraft. It was quite a relief, simply because it's been backed up by somebody else. I was quite relieved that the objects were picked up on radar, and this was what we found to have appeared. This is my aircraft coming in from the northeast into land. This is the other aircraft from Blue Islands coming in from the Isle of Man. This shows the tracks and the times of the object travelling from north to south. And this is the object travelling from south to north. The other pilot was going southeast. And over his left shoulder, looking in his 7 o'clock, he could see the nearest object. But his company wouldn't allow him to come forward.
When Ray Bowyer landed, he filled out a report and made a drawing right in that report of what he saw. He also did some interviews on BBC within a few days later. His airline did not force him to stay quiet.
I actually had no intention of explaining it to anybody, to be fair. I just thought it was just going to go away. And then everyone and their dog wanted to know what it was.
So tell me some of the things that people have said to sort of excuse what your sighting was.
They normally say, how many beers have you had before you went flying?
I would never tell anybody they didn't see what they saw. You know, as every cop and prosecutor will tell you, eyewitness testimony is the worst kinds of testimony. Memory is not a record.
I've seen a lot of strange things in the air, you know, all sorts of different atmospheric anomalies. It looked nothing like that.
There's a lot of stuff out there that appears as UFOs, but that also are very easily identifiable as ordinary technology or ordinary astronomical, meteorological, or atmospheric technologies.
I think most people find it a credible sighting simply because another aircraft in a different place saw it. It's on radar. And of course, there was a 150-page report. It was very in-depth. It was very scientifically done. But yeah, they couldn't find an explanation for it.
Over the years, the U.S. government has had a tendency to try to explain away these events with information that doesn't really fit the facts. But other governments, even right over our border, say in Canada, are much more willing to just acknowledge when they investigate a case that they don't have an explanation for it.
Look at the contrail. Guy's up at 38,000 feet.
Beginning in 1947, the FAA issued a reporting form, and it would be mailed to you, and you would fill it out.
They said, if you see something, you should report it. But you saw something and reported it, you invariably ended up having to answer a bunch of mental stability questions that maybe you shouldn't have had to answer.
My name's Ralph Lowinger, and I am a former Air Force tanker pilot. And after I separated from service, I went to work for Pan American World Airways.
I'm Michael Littlepage. I went through a civilian air training program before joining Pan American. And I have a total of approximately 39,000 hours of flight time.
On the night of October 4th, 1967, and we were flying a Boeing 707 cargo airplane from New York to London. We took off from Kennedy at about midnight, and an hour and a half later, that would have put us up approaching the south coast of Nova Scotia, near Yarmouth, which would have put Shag Harbor to our right and not very far away.
Ralph was busy flying the airplane, and Captain Kurt Olson was talking on the radio to air traffic control.
It was a beautiful, clear night. I was the first one to see this light formation, 5 or 6 lights at our 11 o'clock position. And I said, ooh, watch this guy, because it looked like another airplane banking towards us.
It was moving at the same airspeed, was at the same altitude, and it very slowly drifted towards our left wingtip, to the point where we felt that we were in danger of having a mid-air collision.
Maintain 8,000, Kilo Delta.
I asked Boston Center, I said, do you still have us in radar? And he said, Roger, we still have radar contact. I said, well, who's this guy out here on our left side? He paused a minute and he said, I don't have any traffic out there.
It was the biggest thing that I have ever seen in the sky. We quickly realized that this was not an airplane with its landing lights on, but we were looking into a lighted space object. The light was diffused, it was slightly orange in color, and I couldn't see anything on the inside. And the 5 of us sitting there mesmerized. I was actually terrified. If it had come, a little bit closer and impacted our airplane, that would have been the end of us.
This light formation just sped up and hurtled towards the eastern horizon, approaching the southern coast of Nova Scotia, getting smaller and smaller, and then it disappeared. It was later that same evening. There were sightings all over Nova Scotia, and we weren't aware of that till some years later.
We didn't know anything about Shag Harbor at the time.
On the night of October the 4th, 1967, which is the night known as the Night of the UFOs, there were numerous sightings from the center of Nova Scotia, Metro Halifax, Dartmouth, to the southwestern tip of the province. And if you were outside that night and looked up, you would have seen something unusual in the sky. Laurie Wickens was a local fisherman in Shag Harbor, and he was the very first individual to contact the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Me and a friend of mine, we was coming from Barrington when we got on top of the hill there. And that's where we happened to see the lights. We just thought it was a plane, and it was going along no faster than we was. And it had 4 lights on it. One would come on, 2, and the third one, the 4th one. They'd all be on for a second or so, and then they all went out and started over again. We lost sight of it for about 2 seconds. Made the top of the hill, we could see a light in the water up here about 200 yards from here and about 300 yards from shore. We figured it was a plane crash, so we went to the phone booth, called the RCMP. The first thing he said, what you been drinking? I said, nothing.
At the RCMP, of course, they'd received several other calls. Most of the eyewitnesses that contacted the nearby RCMP reported simply that they thought an aircraft had crashed. Nobody was reporting a UFO. The concern was for the possibility of survivors, that they may have indeed seen the crash of a commercial aircraft.
I think one of the more interesting reports is this Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia sighting that's fairly well documented, because all these civilians who reported these objects, they just thought a plane had crashed. So they weren't even trying to go after any kind of UAP story. They were being honest, good citizens trying to help public safety officials respond to what might have been a mishap.
Once the RCMP arrived on the scene, they tried to approach the strange light that had remained in the water, but before they reached it, it either submerged or disappeared. The search effort went on for several days. The RCMP said, we don't really know what we're looking for. We know it wasn't a conventional aircraft. In fact, we don't know what it was. There was just nothing that would account for it. And eventually the search was terminated, claiming no results. It was the authorities that would first refer to it as an unidentified flying object. What I have here in my hand is a bunch of telexes. Telex back in the day was the primary form of communication, but the great thing about these telexes is often what the staffers wrote in the margins. And when you look at this one, some staffers started to write, could this be a meteorite? And then it's all crossed out. This could not possibly be an aircraft, and it's all crossed out. So again, very telling. Here we have a few days later into the search, and it says, what is the situation? They write unidentified flying object, and they circle it. And the case remains to this day in the present, open and unsolved.
There's no doubt that what we saw was the same type of light formations that were reported in Shag Harbor.
Well, I have never been a believer or denier of UFOs. I know what I saw, and I can remember the apprehension, the helplessness, and abject terror, really. That was a real emotion that I felt that night.
You would think that organizations like the FAA would be more interested in cataloging things that exist in our national airspace that we can't identify. And it's really remarkable to me how unseriously the government has dealt with this subject up until the present day.
Since the congressional hearing with the Navy pilots, the Navy has placed guidelines in effect now, asking their pilots to report these things. The commercial pilots, nothing's really changed. We contacted the FAA to ask them about their reporting procedures for commercial pilots, and they didn't have any. And since there's no reporting mechanism in place for commercial pilots, they don't even really feel comfortable talking about these cases because there's nothing they can do. But these events can be safety problems, and we're not gathering the data we need in order to address that issue.
Should a pilot want to report an issue, they can report it to a number of civilian UFO groups, but there is no way for that information to then therefore be processed or further looked at. So what I've been doing at the organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, is provide the reporting mechanism so that that information can get to the proper channels for further investigation. It was never intended to be a UFO or UAP organization at all. Our primary mission is to identify what's in the sky and just ensuring that pilots have the proper tools to be able to do their job and be safe in the air. After the hearing on Capitol Hill, commercial pilots and others have reached out to our organization to say, hey, one, we support you, thank you for doing this, and two, let me tell you what I'm seeing.
The light disappeared four times, just a small distance apart.
I don't know what it was. I'd love to be able to tell you. I'd love to have an explanation on what it was. But like I said, it turned into a debrief item and never really even thought about it until after my encounter.
We have a lot of pilots that have come forward to me and say, hey, I've seen stuff out there that I can't explain. But I don't have an avenue, really, to express what I've seen without repercussions from the airline. My name is Chris Van Voris, and basically I started flying when I was 14 years old and worked my way up the chain of command all the way up to 747 captain. My initial sighting back in 2005, we were flying back from Fukuoka, Japan, around 39,000 feet, and about 4:30 in the morning, just past Midway Island, when we saw 3 actual discs come into the atmosphere. They sat there for a little while and took off. It's not like they even accelerated, they were just at speed and gone over the horizon. This was something that really kind of rocked my world, and I've seen a lot of the pilots now that kind of feel the same way. They're like, hey, it opened my eyes that we're not maybe alone out there. Back then, though, we couldn't tell anybody. The UAP world, it's something that I think you almost have to have a personal experience with it in order to understand it.
Navigate, and communicate. Pilots are trained to do those 3 things. They've got to fly their airplane, they have to communicate with the ground, they have to follow all the rules and laws of aviation, and all of a sudden, they have to integrate this incursion by a new phenomenon. And this is a challenge.
Pilots are affected differently by their encounters. I mean, it depends on the nature of the encounter, whether it was dangerous or not, how dramatic it was.
Does it affect their cognitive processing? Does it something that keeps them awake at night? Is it interfering with their well-being every day? Can they talk about this? My name is Dr. Iya Whiteley. I am a space psychologist with expertise in clinical psychology and aviation human factors. I'm looking at this phenomena more from the point, not what they're seeing, but I'm interested what is happening in their mind. Initially, my work was not related to UAP. I came across this quite recently, and I felt that if it has an effect on their performance, if it's in any way affecting their decision-making, then we need to see how we can assist.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Chris.
How are you doing again?
Yeah, good to see you. I am at my very early investigation regarding what pilots are seeing. As a psychologist in me, I feel there is something that they're holding back because they're not comfortable talking about this. So what do we need to support the pilots post this encounter, post the observation?
Proper reporting channels and proper interaction between the company and the pilots and the unions, knowing that they won't be subject to any repercussions from the company if they do report it.
We want to collect enough variety of stories that then becomes a database, but we only can have that through pilots having no repercussions for talking about what they're seeing.
It was a very interesting type of experience. I was not a skeptic, but I had never seen anything that I could not explain prior to that. And this was something that I couldn't explain. It's kind of one of those moments you never forget in your life. It makes a huge impact.
What I found interesting with Chris, that when he observed the objects in 2005, it's almost like marked his life, that there was a life before observing something, and then there was a life after. There are experiments in psychology that demonstrate that if you don't want to see something, you will not see it. So if there are pilots who don't want to see a UAP because of the stigma, what else are they not going to notice? It's safety critical.
What we're seeing is things that are undescribable in a way of conventional types of propulsion or flight. And the airline pilots train, for weather anomalies, they train for emergency anomalies that we may have. But no one ever trains you on what you're going to see out there.
If there are many of us speaking up from various perspectives, why not put all of that effort together? And then, we have much better way of investigating.
We have ignition. All
liftoff from a tropical rainforest to the edge of time itself.
I think it's fair to say that science and technology progresses on the shoulders of those who have gone before. What Ryan Graves has done, really, he took the ball and ran with it to form an organization that would carry on NARCAP's work. I think that with the government sponsorship that he is developing, we're going to see some breakthroughs.
The 2024 National Defense Authorization Act had a historic amount of legislation and language regarding the UAP conversation. But this is something that these people really struggle to integrate into their worldview. So how do we move this conversation forward? How do we gain the trust of the American people to show that, hey, we are actually resolving this potential national security issue? I advised a number of representatives on the ways I thought legislation could be introduced. One of those included Congressman Garcia. Ultimately, his office ran with those suggestions and has resulted in him introducing the Safe Airspace for Americans Act.
Commercial pilots may encounter a UAP and they have no real way to report to the government. They can report that to their airline, but the pilots that I've talked to feel that if they reported a UAP, that maybe they would get fired from the airline, or that they would somehow be, tagged with medical condition or some kind of issue. So there needs to be a way to report any type of UAP encounter or any type of UAP experience in a way that's safe to the pilot. Our new proposal, our Safe Aerospace Act, is currently in the Congress. It has both Republican and Democratic support. It provides a transparent process for pilots to report any UAP encounter. Those are collected, and then they are forwarded on to our department within the U.S. government that actually currently is looking at UAPs.
If nothing else, this will provide additional data points for the commercial airliners to better understand the safety risks that their aircrew are exposed to.
Can you imagine the amount of data that's been lost because pilots are afraid to say something? Over the years, there's been thousands and thousands of hours flown with people seeing things that they didn't feel good about reporting because they were worried about repercussions.
As we look at this data and help us better understand the total scope of the problem, it's going to inform our ability to better detect UAP in the future.
One of the things I've come to believe is that there are fascinating frontiers of meteorology, atmospheric science, astronomy, mind-bending physics that to us would be just as interesting as the answer being aliens.
We have now available to us lots of relatively inexpensive sensors that can monitor the sky and the environment 24/7. And in addition to that, the advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence allow us to process large amounts of data in a short time.
There was a lot going on in 2017 that made a big difference in public opinion.
Earlier this month, it was revealed that the Department of Defense ran a $22 million effort to document and research UFOs.
As a scientist, that mattered, and it mattered to my colleagues. My colleagues realized, wow, there's apparently something interesting here. Yeah, it warrants scientific investigation.
Curiosity drives science. So why aren't we not curious about something that many professionals are reporting?
There's no doubt that there's a stigma attached to this subject in the science community still today. But if we're going to be scientists, we need to lay it all out and let people come to their own conclusions.